About 2 years ago, I started a series of videos where I talked about some weapon balance ideas that I would personally like to see. Well, I actually did basically the same thing when I first made this channel, but we don't talk about that. Eventually, I did finally finish doing one for all 9 classes, but there have been some changes since then. I've always planned on making one final video in this series to go over some of the weapons that have gotten changed and updates, just some personal idea changes I've had since I've started, and maybe just throw in some ideas that I personally think might be kinda neat. Again, it's all hypothetical, there's multiple ways you can balance a weapon, you know the deal. I'm sure this is gonna be a pretty long video, so I'll just have timestamps for whatever I talk about in the description. And hey, since this video is basically about any of the classes, you could leave comments for any balance ideas you might have about any of the classes. Or leave a comment about anything, I don't care. Alright, okay, we're gonna start with the Pyro since Pyro got new weapons most recently, and yeah. I think the Dragon's Fury has potential to be a really good alternative to the Flamethrower, and while it's not really bad, it does require significantly more effort to use than the Flamethrower, without having a significantly higher reward even if you do land every single shot. And the Air Blast on the Dragon's Fury is bad. Its cooldown is more than double what the Flamethrower's is, which makes the Dragon's Fury not as good at comboing with Pyro's other weapons. When this weapon came out, a lot of people cried that it was overpowered, but you're gonna get that with almost any new weapon. And after that pretty significant projectile size nerf it got, I rarely see it used anymore. To an extent, I think reducing the Dragon's Fury's projectile size was fine, because it did start out maybe a little bit too large, but I think it can be slightly increased again. If we need to make it a number, we'll say 10 to 15%. We can also reduce the repressurization rate on alt-fire from minus 50% to minus 25%, which will allow you to fire an air blast again sooner after you've just air blasted. It's still going to be slower than stock, but it's definitely going to be better. Currently, it takes so long to air blast that a lot of times it's not even worth it. But yeah, those are just some small adjustments that you could make to the Dragon's Fury that would make it better overall, and I think that would be a good place to start. And, yeah. Yo, the Gas Passer is trash. It's probably one of the worst weapons currently in this game, you know, outside of Man vs. Machine, of course, where it's very good. But it's trash in the regular game. There's a lot wrong with this weapon the way it is. Most obviously, it takes a million years to charge. And while I actually like the idea of it charging with both damage and time, the time takes way too long and the damage needed is also way too high. Also, the gas on coated enemies disappears as soon as the player is ignited, which means if they're extinguished, and there's a fair amount of things that can extinguish fire in this game, you just wasted a gas can that took 60 seconds or 750 damage to fill. Pyro also has this thing called the Scorch Shot, which is super easy to use, can be fired every 2 seconds, and does actual direct damage too. It also deals knockback and mini crystal burning targets, so like, why would you ever really use the Gas Passer over the Scorch Shot if you had the 2 options? I don't know. If you want a long-range weapon that's just for afterburn, you're probably going to use that, or really any of Pyro's flare guns. However, the Gas Passer does deal 10 seconds of afterburn compared to the flare gun 7.5. It can ignite Pyros, and the Gas Cloud can work as area denial, even if it's not very threatening. But other than that, there's nothing really special about the Gas Passer's afterburn. There's really no point in coating someone with gas and then igniting them with your flamethrower, because you could just ignite them with your flamethrower. So how could we fix some of these problems? Get ready, because there's going to be a lot of changes. We can start by reducing the time needed to fill the gas meter from 60 seconds to 40 seconds, and reducing the damage needed from 750 to 600. This way you're going to get it significantly faster than you would now. We'll also make it so that enemy players will now continue to be coated in gas even after they've been ignited, meaning they can now be reignited if they're extinguished. And the gas cloud for the Gas Passer only lasts about 5 seconds, so it's pretty easy to wait out. I think we could increase that to maybe 10. That way it can act as some real area denial and not just a very minor inconvenience. We'll also add, coated enemies take plus 25% afterburn damage. This means the afterburn caused by this weapon will now deal 5 damage per tick instead of 4, making it stronger than regular afterburn. But all of these buffs will come at a minor cost. The afterburn duration will now be based on the amount of time the gas has left on the coated player, with the duration scaling from 10 seconds to 1 second instead of always being 10 seconds. This works better with the gas not disappearing right after the player's been ignited, and makes it a little less obnoxious to play against with a stronger afterburn. Oh, and we'll also make it so that the gas meter now actually empties on death instead of, like, carrying over from the previous life, which is just weird and wouldn't really be necessary if the Gas Passer actually charged at a reasonable rate. Oh, and one last super important thing, coated players are now considered wet. I don't know why they aren't currently, but this would make it pair with the Neon Annihilator, and that would be super cool. The Hot Hand is really just a joke weapon, but that doesn't really mean it has to be bad. Well, it's not really awful, there just really isn't anything special about it other than that it swings twice. But Pyro has better melee options, even just for meleeing people. So why not make the hot hand actually good at smacking people? If you're gonna run up to someone's face and smack them instead of using your flamethrower, it can at least be good at smacking. Here's what we're gonna do. Add second successful slap in a row always mini crits, and a third successful slap in a row always crits. So now if you smack someone once, you deal 28 damage, you get a speed boost. If the second hit connects, it deals 38 damage with a mini crit. And if you swing again and hit, it'll do 84 damage with a crit. A pretty simple buff that would make the weapon a lot better. Even if you're probably not going to use it over a melee weapon with a more utility purpose, it's still going to make it better. And more interesting. And more fun. And that's fine. I think the current Degreaser is fine. It's not really a weapon that needs any changes. But if I were to go back to Tough Break when the weapon got its semi-major changes, I think I would have done things a little bit differently. The Degreaser is all about its ability to combo with other weapons. And a big thing that allows you to combo with other weapons is Air Blast. But it also has an Air Blast penalty. But also, at the same time, this weapon's direct damage is the same as Stock's, so it's equally as good at WM1. I'd say get rid of the increased Air Blast cost and add a minus 15% damage penalty. It just seems to make more sense that way. Now the thing that you use to get follow-ups with your other weapons doesn't cost as much, but you're now going to be even more reliant on those other weapons because the flames themselves won't do as much damage. It's also kinda interesting that even though they increased the base damage of Afterburn from 3 to 4, they kept the Degreaser's Afterburn penalty at minus 66% instead of bringing it down to minus 75%. It still just deals 1 damage either way, it's just kind of weird. The Degreaser did kinda get the short end of the stick on that one. So I think we could also reduce the damage penalty from minus 66% to minus 50%, which would make it deal 2. Overall, I don't think these changes would make the Degreaser necessarily any better or worse. I just think they fit better with the design that the weapon was going for. And that's pretty much it. So all flare guns were buffed in Jungle Inferno with the base changes to Afterburn. Instead of dealing a max of 60 Afterburn over the course of 10 seconds, flare guns now deal 60 over the course of 7.5 seconds. It's a relatively minor buff, and I'm pretty much okay with it on everything except for the Scorch Shot. I wouldn't say the Scorch Shot is overpowered, but it can be very annoying to fight, and it's incredibly easy to use. You could give the Scorch Shot an Afterburn damage penalty, or reduce its burn time, but I think I would just say, bring the direct damage penalty from minus 35% back down to minus 50%. Because the Scorch Shot is capable of hitting twice with a single flare, it's currently able to deal more damage with just one shot than the flare gun can, even with that damage penalty. Making the damage penalty go from minus 35% to minus 50% will reduce the base damage from 20 to 15, and reduce the mini-crit damage from 26 to 20. And yeah, this would be a pretty minor nerf, but it's gonna make those double-hitting flares and any follow-up hits do less damage. Pretty much just to counteract that Jungle Inferno buff, and I think that would be fine. If there's any weapon in this game that I think could use a ground-up rework, it's probably the Phlogistinator. It's a dumb weapon with a dumb design, and it's boring. In the Pyro Balance video, I kinda tried to make it work, but I really don't think it's worth it anymore. In most cases, when used against better players, it's just bad. Being completely vulnerable to projectiles is not really fun. But on the other hand, if you happen to use your oomph at the right time, you could just vaporize the other team without really trying. A Phlogistinator in the open isn't much of a threat at all, but you can't really predict whether or not one of the crits is going to be around the corner. I thought for a while about changing what oomph did, but I'm not even really sure that it needs to exist, at least not on this weapon. I think I even preferred instantly getting back all your health over the crits back when it did both. Not every pyro weapon needs a crit gimmick, but I also generally like the idea of a laser flamethrower having infinite ammo, but decreasing direct damage when mouse 1 is continuously held. It makes the weapon more unique, and fits the whole theme of the other Roared weapons. So if we're reworking the Phlog, I'd say remove everything related to oomph, add does not require ammo, and add a power meter that decreases when continuously fired. Let's say the damage decreases by 5% per second after the first, and caps at a minus 30% damage penalty. The power meter will recover at the same rate that it drains, and does not need to be active to recover. We're also going to change no air blasts to alt fire and electric shock that destroys projectiles. This is going to act exactly like the short circuits alt fire did before the Blue Moon update. But using the alt fire will require 33% of your power meter and cannot be used below 33%. It's generally going to be easier to aim than air blast, be better against stickies, and deal very minor damage, but it's also not going to deal knockback and can't reflect anything. I'd say it's generally a little bit worse than Air Blast, but at the same time it's going to be something that's unique to the Phlog and works with the infinite ammo and power meter pretty nicely. And finally, we'll add user is healed for 25% of the damage dealt by this weapon. Like I was saying before, I kinda preferred the health over the crits, and this gives the Phlogistinator a way of restoring health that I think also works decently well with the power meter. Normally, you probably wouldn't want a flamethrower that returns health because that's most likely going to encourage the pyro to just run at enemies. But if the Phlogistinator penalizes the user for holding down their fire button for too long, they're not going to be able to do that very effectively. It also keeps some of the hit and run aspects of the current Phlog. If you run in and ignite 2 people and get out, you'll be healing 4 health per second as long as they're on fire. It'll give pyro a reliable way of returning health, even if it's not a massive amount. I'm not really sure how this version might work out or what changes it would need after this, but I think the base of it would be a lot more interesting to use and to play against than the current version, because the current version is kind of dumb. But yeah, how does this look? Does it look okay? I don't know. The Criticola is still banned competitively even after its pretty major nerf in Jungle Inferno, though I haven't really seen it be much of an issue in casual. I've said it a bunch of times at this point, but I think for the most part that competitively banned weapons can be adjusted to where they're no longer banned, but also remain good in casual. They don't have to be competitively viable, just not banned. Even if you disagree and don't think that competitive should play a role in balancing, it's at the very least an interesting brain exercise to try to come up with a solution. Which is what I did here. I don't know if I necessarily prefer this version, but I think it would work. Alright, so here's something I was thinking for the Criticola. Remove the mark for death for 5 seconds after you attack, and change attacks mini crits to melee weapons crit. After drinking Criticola, your melee weapon will automatically be drawn, and the effects won't end until it's holstered. But holstering your melee weapon while under its effects will take 100% longer. This kind of makes it more like the Buffalo Steak. Probably less practical, but I think it could end up being pretty fun. You're not going to be able to use it with your gun, but now you get full crits on your melee weapon, you don't take mini crits, and you can use it for as long as you want. A crit from Scout's Bat deals 105 damage, allowing it to 2-shot 8 out of the 9 classes. However, this does require getting super close and being unable to quickly switch back to your scattergun anytime you need it. Like the current Criticola, it's still high risk, high reward, and requires knowing when to use it. But at high level play, this version really shouldn't be much of an issue. For Mad Milk, I'm going to say do the exact same thing I suggested for Girardi, and have it charge like the Gas Passer. Increase the time-based recharge from 20 seconds to 40, and allow it to charge with damage dealt, requiring 600 damage. Increase the cooldown time reduction for extinguishing teammates from 20% to 50%, and add jar meter starts empty. Mad Milk is also weapon banned competitively, and while I don't know for sure that this change would result in it being unbanned, I do like this change even for casual. Mad Milk and Girardi are super easy to use and have very powerful effects. This change keeps them very easy to use, but adds a skill element when it comes to how fast it recharges. Alright, so every scout secondary that isn't the winger is banned in 6s. And I really don't have any idea how you could change Bonk again, but for the Pretty Boy's pocket pistol, it's kinda dumb in any format. I mean, it might as well just be an upgrade to the pistol. Its downside is super minor, it can deal more damage, and it heals you. The biggest issue with the pre-Jungle Inferno version of the pocket pistol was that it made you take 20% more damage just for having it out. And on a weapon about healing, that's a pretty dumb design. So, you know what? I'm just gonna say go back to the same stats I suggested in my original scout video. We're going to increase the maximum health restored on hit from +3 to up to +10, re-add Wearer Never Takes Fall damage when active, have the health on hit scale with damage dealt, bring back the slower firing speed, and add 50% slower holster time. We'll have the health on hit be 1 HP per 2 damage dealt with a max of 10. This means that at long range it's going to heal 4, at mid range 8, and at close range 10. The no fall damage when active paired pretty well with the Babyface's blaster, and I actually kinda miss it even if it wasn't super useful. And the 50% slower holster time makes you commit a little bit more to this weapon without it being a needlessly crippling downside like a 20% damage vulnerability was. That's basically it. A good health on hit weapon that has some utility and it's not just a better pistol. Good enough. And yeah, the Flying Guillotine is banned too. Mainly because it's capable of dealing very large chunks of damage regardless of range. After the Jungle Inferno changes, I suggested a way of making the weapon more unique, but it didn't address the ban. Alright, so here's what we could do. Give the Flying Guillotine damage ramp up and fall off. Make the maximum ramp up 120% and the maximum fall off 70%. With a base damage of 50, this means it's now going to do 35 at long range and 60 at close range. It's going to deal more damage up close, but that really shouldn't be much of an issue since at that range the scattergun is capable of doing a lot more. And we're also going to add 100% mini crits versus debuffed targets. So enemies that are slowed down, on fire, bleeding, covered in milk, or whatever, are now going to take 68 damage regardless of distance, and even a little bit more up close. The most common producer of debuffs, the Pyro, isn't part of the standard 6's lineup, and getting a long range hit against a player who happens to be on fire in competitive is probably rare enough to not really be an issue. Overall though, I think it'd make it a lot more interesting and maybe slightly better in casual. It's been a while since the Sandman got its big nerf, and I never thought I'd be saying this, but I think we could maybe buff the Sandman a little bit. I've said before that you could probably change the Sandman's downside to one that isn't passive, and it would instantly be pretty good even if it is a little bit less unique. But I don't know if I'd go that route. I don't even think the current version is that bad, but there's a couple of minor buffs I would give it. First off, we're going to make slow targets visibly marked with stars circling their head, like it did back when they were actually stunned by the ball. There have been plenty of times where I launch a ball at a group of people while I'm moving, and then I turn back towards them and I'm not even really sure who I hit. This would allow you and your teammates to quickly identify who's been hit and when the slowdown ends. We can also make it so that the ball will now cause slowdown for a minimum of 2 seconds regardless of range. Currently at close range it only does damage and doesn't slow. This is a carryover from when it stunned, and that actually made sense, that you couldn't stun someone who's right in your face. But now that it just slows, I think 2 seconds at close range is fine. So now it'll scale from 2 seconds at close range to 7 seconds at long range. And in Jungle Inferno, they also made it so that long range hits by the ball do 50% more damage, but since the base ball has such a low base damage of 15, that long range hit is only going to do 23. We could bring the base damage up to 20, which would increase the long range damage to 30. And it would also just make it do a little bit more damage in general. Not a huge buff, but it does give a little more reward for hitting the ball, especially at longer ranges. So now that the stun is gone, I think there's a lot of ways you could go about changing the Sandman. Maybe you could reduce the slowdown amount, but also reduce the target's firing speed, or maybe change the downside to something less severe. But I tend to err on the side of caution when it comes to slowdown mechanics, because they're generally not that fun. But overall though, I think these changes would be a goodish place to start for the new Sandman. The Fan of War's crits with a normally mini crit stat is kind of like the Atomizer's mini crits while airborne one. It seems like maybe it might come in handy in some situations, but the damage penalty on the weapon makes it basically worthless. The Atomizer's mini crit does 41 damage, which is only 6 higher than the Bat's base damage. And the Fan of War's crit does 26, which is 9 less than the Bat's base damage. All you need to do is lower the Fan of War's damage penalty from minus 75% to minus 50%. That way the base damage goes from 9 to 18, and the crit damage goes from 26 to 53, which is 18 higher than stock's damage. And this way, getting follow-up hits with the Fan of War actually means something. Neat. I've seen a lot of people say that the buff banner should be given an additional upside because the other 2 banners have one. And while I don't think that's super necessary, I think a plus 40% max primary ammo on wearer would fit it pretty nicely. That increases soldiers' reserve ammo from 20 to 28, which is basically 2 extra clips. It fits well, is fairly useful, and isn't a massive buff for a weapon that doesn't really need a massive buff. Good. The Disciplinary Action is also banned in 6s. It allows both soldier and a teammate to get to mid significantly faster than they would otherwise, at no real cost. Soldier already has great mobility, but that's always come at the cost of losing health. And the Disciplinary Action allows you and a heavy to get to the battle much faster, basically for free. The weapon doesn't really have much of a downside. Even as a melee weapon, it's arguably better than the shovel because of its super long range. But I have a feeling that if the TF2 team tries to balance the Disciplinary Action in a way that's going to get it unbanned, they're just going to nerf it into uselessness. I have an idea, and it's maybe not the most interesting one, but I think it might solve the problem. Maybe. Add plus 15% faster move speed on wearer when active, and add maximum health as slowly drained when active. We can also revert the meet your match nerf so that it now boosts teammates for 3 seconds again. Oh, and because it does have long range, it should probably holster and deploy slower like swords do. But also like swords, I think it should be 66% slower instead of 100% slower like it is now. It's a little bit too slow, I think. But anyway, the health drain is going to act exactly like the gloves are running urgently or the eviction notice does. And some people have pointed out that the meet your match nerf can actually be beneficial in some ways, because it does allow Soldier to catch up with a boosted teammate a little bit easier. But with Soldier moving faster for just having the Disciplinary Action out, it makes him roughly the same speed as Demoman, which allows him more easily catch teammates, and also makes his own speed boost better. Currently, a Soldier moves at about 112% move speed when boosted, but with this change he'd move at about 129%. So that's a pretty noticeable increase. But this does mean that a Soldier is now sacrificing some of his own health in order to get his team to the fight. But he also runs faster for just having it out, so if you suck at rocket jumping, you could use it to get somewhere a little bit faster. And in competitive, it's going to mean that a Soldier using it is going to be at a much lower max health when getting to mid, which could be a pretty big deal. However, it does still allow Heavy to get there quickly without any cost to the Heavy himself. So it doesn't fix that problem, but it does give the Disciplinary Action an actual downside without making it bad. And that's as good as I could get for now. Does anyone else have any ideas for it? In the Demoman balance video, I brought up a way that you could make the Claide, more unique without reverting it to its pre-Tough Break version, mostly because I didn't see them actually reverting it. But in Jungle Inferno, they kinda did. And as much as I've always liked this weapon, it's always been somewhat underwhelming, especially compared to Demoman's other swords. The idea I brought up in the original video would have made you gain a speed boost when your charge ends, and I still think that fits the weapon pretty well. But along with that new upside, we'll also fully revert the Clade's downside. Originally it was minus 15 max health on wearer. The current 15% damage vulnerability only when active is a little bit less of a harsh downside in most scenarios, but with a new upside, the weapon's going to be better overall. And removing the when active stat is now going to allow you to increase your charge duration whether or not your sword is actually out. I think the speed boost upside would fit this weapon very well. You'll be able to charge longer distances, and then the speed boost after that's going to allow you to move even further. Now you've got the Eyelander as kind of the general sword, the Clade for distance and movement, the Skull Cutter for damage, the Half Zatoichi for health, and the Persian Persuader for quick recharges. In my original heavy video, I mentioned some ways that we can make the Natascha less annoying to fight, while also making the weapon better overall. Mainly adjusting the slowdown and removing the extra stats that were slapped on over the years. I think that version would be a big improvement over what we have now, but because the ability to control a target's move speed is always going to be a tricky thing to try and balance, I was thinking, what if we just did away with it entirely? And what's the next best thing to slowing down enemies? Making yourself faster. Now, this really could just be an entirely new weapon, but if we did decide that slowdown wasn't worth it, I think this would be the way to go. Remove the 30% slower spin up, remove the resistance when below 50% health, and add plus 75% faster move speed while deployed. Then change on hit slow target to gain a speed boost while firing. The faster movement speed while spun up will obviously apply to Heavy's spun up move speed and not his base move speed, meaning that when he's spun up he'll be moving at about 65% move speed. Heavy's default is 77% and his spun up speed is 37%, so he'll still be moving a little bit slower. But the speed boost will further increase his movement speed by 40%, bringing his movement up to 91%, which is a little bit slower than Demoman. You'll be moving slower when you're spun up, but if you're shooting, you're actually moving faster than you would normally. But you need to know how to conserve your ammo, and you're still dealing a lot less damage than you could with stock. I don't know if I would for sure want to see this version replace what we have in game, but I do think it'd be a cool concept, and it could replace what we have in game if the slowdown was deemed too much of a problem. I still think it'd be neat though. After Jungle Inferno, there was a bug related to the Dalokohs Bar and the new version of the gloves running urgently that allowed you to gain way more overheal than intended. When they fixed this, they ended up nerfing the Dalokohs Bar so that it doesn't give any overheal past 350 if you're at full health, like it used to. So it's even more mediocre than it was. I think instead of having it increase your max health for 30 seconds, maybe it should give an up to 100 health overheal that doesn't decay. The overheal amount would be dependent on the amount of health you have when it's eaten. If you eat it at 300 health, you get overhealed up to 400. If you eat it at 250, you get overhealed up to 350, and so on. But if you eat it at 200 health or below, it's only going to heal you and it's not going to do anything past that. And any additional overheal you get from a medic will still decay like normal. You'll also have overheal particles like you would if you got it from a medic, so it's clear to the other team that you're overhealed. And I think this would make the Dalokohs Bar very useful for when your team doesn't have a medic, or you just kind of want to go out on your own. Compared to how the bar is currently, this is mostly better unless it's eaten at below 200 health. Since the Dalokohs Bar currently increases your max health, it also increases the amount of health you gain from health pickups. But other than that, having increased overheal that doesn't decay is going to be much more useful. And I think this would make the Dalokohs Bar, which has always been pretty meh, actually very useful. For when you don't have a medic with you, at least. When I talked about the Buffalo Steak Sandwich last time, I just focused on making it better. But despite the weapon itself not being very good, it's banned in 6s because it allows Heavy to get to mid faster, basically for free. I think I might have a way to fix this and still make the steak better though. Still kind of a mess around weapon, but definitely better. First off, we're going to have it heal 100 health when eating it along with its other effects. You're kind of giving up a lot not having a self-healing item as Heavy, and while this wouldn't heal you that much, it could be used to top off your health or heal off some damage if you really need it. We're also going to remove both the 20% damage vulnerability and the increased movement speed while under the steak's effects. Instead of locking you into your melee weapon for 16 seconds, you're now going to have your melee weapon automatically drawn after you eat the steak, and the effects won't end until it's holstered. Pretty much exactly like the Criticola idea I mentioned before. So now you're able to switch off whenever you want, and can keep mini-crit punching things for as long as you want. But this will come at the cost of a 75% slower melee holster. And while you're under the steak's effects, if you get a melee kill, you will now gain a speed boost that will last till your melee weapon is withdrawn. You won't get faster move speed right away like you do now, but after you get a kill, the speed boost will allow you to move even faster than the stake does currently. Basically, the speed isn't going to be gained until after you get a kill, but you also don't take extra damage, aren't locked into your melee weapon for 16 seconds, and you also heal a bit from eating the stake. It would be a lot better overall, it wouldn't be banned, and I think it would be a lot more fun to use. The change to the gloves of running urgently in Jungle Inferno was overall a smart change, even if I do think it was a little bit harsh. The original version of the gloves damaged you for 6 health every second that it was out, which basically just acted as free Uber for your medic, and the previous downside was easily negated by putting the weapon away before you got to battle, which you were going to do anyway. While the newer version is obviously not as good, it does prevent Heavy from negating one of his core downsides without a cost. Plus it actually got unbanned in 6s. But I think we could probably reduce the max health drain per second from -10 to -8. This way, after the initial health decrease from switching to it, it'll take about 23 seconds to get to the minimum health of 100 instead of the 18 it is now. But the way the health regen works after it's drained is that it regenerates at the same rate that it decreases, meaning it'll regenerate slightly slower too. But overall, having it drain slower is going to be more beneficial in most scenarios because you'll arrive with a little bit more health. Basically, it's going to be a little bit better for the first 18 seconds that you use it, but very slightly worse for those remaining 5 if you use it long enough to get to the minimum health. The biggest problem with the Eviction Notice currently is that it regenerates at the same rate that it drains. Meaning, sure, it drains at half the rate that the gloves of running urgently do, but it also takes longer to get back. And its speed increase is only 15%, which means it's going to take longer to get to where you're going to go anyway. The previous version of the Eviction Notice wasn't much of a problem, but if we went back to that, I'm not sure there would be a good reason to use the current gloves of running urgently. If we're going to work with the current stats, I think you could reduce the health drain per second from -5 to -3, have the max health decrease when switched to reduce from -20 to -10, and reduce the damage penalty from -60 to -50%, because I actually like punching people with it. So like I said before, making the drain rate slower is going to make the regen rate slower, which could be a bad thing if it's held out for too long. But reducing the drain rate and the initial decrease from switching to the Eviction Notice makes it much better and safer for running in short bursts. This way, the gloves of running urgently will tend to be better for running long distances, and the Eviction Notice will be better used in small chunks. You could take them out for 5 seconds and only lose 25 health, where currently you'd lose 45. This also makes them better for taking out quickly and getting into melee fights if you wanted to, which could work well with its other stats. Just make sure not to let your max health decrease by too much, because it will take quite a while to get back. The nerfs to the Fists of Steel and Jungle Inferno were mostly okay. They're only really in effect if the Heavy has a medic. However, they did have what I'm assuming was an unintended side effect of allowing a medic who is healing a Heavy with the Fist of Steel out to always gain Uber at the maximum rate. Because the Fists of Steel reduce Heavy's maximum overheal, he can never reach the point where the Uber rate gets cut. So that downside can actually be beneficial. Here's what I'd say. Remove the -40% overheal downside when active, and just increase the health from healer's penalty from -40% to -75%. This way, the Heavy can still reach maximum overheal, but its ability to tank tons of damage with a medic is still reduced. Now, technically, it taking longer to heal a Heavy with them out still does allow a medic to build Uber faster, kinda like healing a backscratcher Pyro, but the drawback would be enough that I don't think it'd be an issue. Cause it's gonna take a lot longer to heal a Heavy who has low health, or even half health. It's gonna take a while. When I made the medic balance ideas video, I mentioned that the stock Syringe Gun should probably be buffed, but I wasn't really sure how you could do it without adding some gimmicks onto it or increasing its damage output. But a lot of people did give some pretty good solutions. I don't think the Syringe Gun is ever going to be as overall useful as the Crusader's Crossbow, and it doesn't really have to be. Presumably, the reason you'd use a Syringe Gun over the Crossbow is because it's better for self-defense. And in their current states, even that's kinda arguable. So we're gonna try to make the Syringe Gun better without increasing its direct damage output. We can start by increasing its projectile speed from 1000 hammer units a second to 1200 hammer units a second, a 20% increase. We can also remove its random projectile deviation, meaning if you fire 10 syringes from the same position, they're all gonna land in the same spot instead of having them spread like they do now. So that's gonna make it a lot more consistent. And maybe we could also let it reload automatically when not active. This would make it the only non-single shot weapon in the game to do that. The Syringe Gun takes quite a while to reload and has to finish its entire animation for it to count. But this would make it always ready to use when you need it. But since it does reload slowly, it's still going to leave you open if you're reloading it in battle. And I think with all these buffs, it'd probably be fine to have the Syringe Gun syringes act like any other projectile, and have them be reflectable by air blast, and destroyable by the short circuit. It's always been kinda weird that they aren't. So overall, this is going to make Medic Syringe Guns a lot more consistent, easier to aim, and more reliable. In my original medic video, I suggested adding a new upside to the Vita-Saw, specifically 15% uber charge added on hit. While this isn't the most interesting upside out there, it does help solve a big issue with the weapon currently. If you die with 0% charge, it doesn't matter how many organs you collected, because you're still going to spawn with 0% charge. That new upside allows you to get one final hit in before you die, and guarantee you start the next life with 15%. Plus, it's just kind of a useful upside in general, even if it's not as good as the uber saws. But even if it did have that upside, I don't see the Vita-Saw being used because of its downside. Sure, 10 health isn't a massive amount, but you're losing 10 health whether or not you actually end up using the Vita-Saw in that life. Staying alive is super important for medic, and it's usually not worth it to reduce your survivability for a weapon you probably won't actually be hitting people with all that frequently. I say just change the health penalty to a 20% damage vulnerability when it's active. Yeah, again, it's also a really basic change, but it would make the weapon a lot more usable. You're still going to be easier to kill when you're actually trying to hit people with it, but only when you're trying to hit people with it. And I think these changes would actually make the Vita-Saw pretty decent. In the sniper video, I suggested that we could reduce the Darwin's Danger Shield's fire resistance to 25% and add back the plus 25 max health upside. And while I would still much prefer that over what we have now, I don't really like the Danger Shield being an anti-pyro weapon. I mean, sure, it's useful against flares since you don't flinch from the afterburn, but we already had a weapon that prevents flinching in the Cozy Camper. But if you really needed that upside, I would say rework it back into the camper. The original version of the Danger Shield, which was just increased health, was partially meant to allow Sniper to play a little bit more aggressively. It was pretty underwhelming, and was later added onto making it into an anti-sniper weapon. And that version did need to be changed. If I was going back to pre-Jungle Inferno, I'd probably strip the Danger Shield down to plus 25 health, and add plus 10% faster move speed on wearer. That'd make the Sniper move very slightly faster than Medic and Spy, and I think would be way more fun to use. The increased health and speed lets you get a little bit closer to the fight and faster, and yeah, just be more aggressive. Without the bullet resistance, the increased health shouldn't be much of a problem, but I did have some people bring it up when I mentioned bringing back the extra health last time. The difference in the amount of overheal needed to survive a quickscope headshot would be 26 on a regular sniper, and 1 on a Danger Shield sniper. And in high level play, that could be pretty important, even if I don't think the original version was ever banned competitively. If you want to prevent that from even potentially being a problem, we could just add the same minus 100% maximum overheal on wearer downside that the Razorback has. It would be a pretty minor downside on sniper in a casual setting, but a pretty important one competitively. And I don't know. I think this version would be way more fun than what we have now, but maybe that's just me. So I have this semi-irrational dislike of weapons that only exist to counter one class. I guess I wouldn't dislike them as much if I thought any of them were done particularly well. It's not like there have ever been a lot of weapons like that, but I don't think a weapon where all of its upsides or all of its downsides apply to just one class are a good idea, generally speaking. I'll probably make a whole video on the concept of class counters at some point, but as far as the Spy-cicle goes, it does do it decently well. When I'm playing Pyro, I don't feel helpless against a Spy-cicle spy. He's still trackable, and I prevent him from backstabbing any of my teammates for 15 seconds. The Spy-cicle is effectively just an escape option, and since it's mainly just a tool for escaping, I was thinking, what if we added some stats based around that so it's not just an anti-pyro weapon that becomes a minor downgrade if the enemy team stops having a pyro? I was thinking something like a 0.5 second decrease in time taken to cloak at the cost of having a plus 20% faster cloak drain rate. So instead of taking 1 second to cloak, it'll be half that, making it easier to escape and remain unseen. But your cloak will drain faster, meaning you have less time to both get into enemy territory and escape it if you need to. I think these changes could make the Spy-cicle more unique and slightly expand what it's capable of doing, but I am aware that they really aren't all that necessary. Even if the enemy team doesn't have a pyro, you're giving away your position by creating ice statues when you kill people. But at the same time, you could cloak faster so it's easier to remain unseen. At the very least, it'd be more interesting. Could be kinda cool though. Like ice, it's cold. And that was it! The final one! For now. I'm sure there's gonna be updates in the future that have some balance changes, so I may do one that's just kind of like a post-new update balance ideas thing. Maybe that'll be soon. Hopefully there'll be updates soon. But I've been talking for like a million hours now, and I don't feel like writing an outro. This is what you get!